And we've got two guests to come on up, and I'd like to invite our guests up. We have Krista, and Daniel. And if I'd like to both of you to come on up, because come on up right now, come on up.
It's Krista.
Come on right up, come on, Krista, come on up. Krista and Daniel, this is our first dialogue officially. So, you brought me a present.
I brought a prop because you asked me for it.
Yeah, I did. Okay.
Presenting my work. Yes.
So, please have a seat, please. Welcome to our stage. And what I'm going to do is I would like to ask the two of you to introduce yourselves to the group before we delve in to our conversations. And perhaps, Krista, can I ask you to begin?
Ladies first.
Well, okay, Daniel, you can go. We don't have to do the gender thing.
We're in an equal world, no?
Yeah. The CD, I was going alphabet. That's all right.
Well, I'm Krista. Some of you have already... Better? Yeah? Okay, I have to be closer, sorry. Yeah, my name is Krista. Always struggle to introduce myself. Something a good friend of mine keeps telling me, you're a generalist reconnecting a fragmented world. And why? Because I'm extremely interested in a lot of different things. By training, I'm a geographer, so we learn to integrate and look at different perspectives. But then, I recently started working in the arts, and I learned it's actually okay not to be able to be put into a box. And as I would describe it today, I work at the interface of the human body, nature's body, the soil. Yeah, maybe. Maybe this you hear me now, yeah? Okay, I can hang out, yeah? I won't lean back too much, don't worry. Now, so I work at interfaces and I build bridges, which I've been doing all my life, between the human body. I used to do a lot of sports and then also sports management. The nature's body, in particular soil, but of course soil as the basis of all our ecosystems and also of human lives, and entrepreneurship, because at the end of the day, it's all about jumping into action at the right moment. Great. And I think I'll leave it at this for now.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. And Daniel, you're also not a person who gets put into a box very easily.
Yeah, I hate being put into a box.
Yes.
First of all, really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Who am I? I'm a temporary expression of life as a planetary process. Trying to be of service, creating conditions conducive to life.
That's great. Wow. And what? That's a perfect way to start. What is, for both of you, regeneration? Because, so Daniel, Tobias has mentioned you many times in our conversations, and this is how I came to you, is through him talking about your conversations together and inspiring his thinking. And you have chosen to live in Mallorca, in the area there, and you're actually making regeneration your life, if I may say that. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that and what regeneration is for you and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, I said, we very often misunderstand life as something that is an attribute of individuals and species. Life is really a planetary process, and we could also look at life as that total, the biosphere, that wonderful Russian coined word, that is that living planet. And in order to meaningfully contribute to that, we have to do so in a particular place with particular people, not in the abstract of problem solving and solutioneering, but in the concrete of the potential of people in place. So after spending a good 20 years moving 28 times to different countries and learning, I had a real need to put a stake in the ground and say, this is my place, this is where I'm going to grow roots. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm the custodian of half a hectare of syntropic agroforestry food forest, and that's my great teacher at the moment on the island of Mallorca. And I chose Mallorca and the Balearics because it has that scalar dimension. It's an archipelago bioregion with 4 different sized islands that is the biodiversity hotspot of the Western Mediterranean. And working bioregionally, always the most difficult thing that you bump into is defining the boundaries of your bioregion. And islands have a really nice way of being defined.
Fairly convenient there, yes.
Yeah.
And Krista, you have brought a prop, which I was glad you did. Explain a little bit more, because with your focus, as I understand now, has a lot to do with soil. Right?
Yes, it does.
So share with us a little bit more about soil and what we need to be understanding about soil.
Regeneration or soil? I'll jump back to regeneration.
You've got the mic, right? So.
Okay, so maybe first, briefly, because I think it makes sense, soil is my expression of working on regeneration, but how do I get here? Big question, exploring regeneration. I'm very, very humbled to be allowed to share my view here, because there's not one single truth, and of course my voice is one voice, and together we start to make sense. One part of me is very academic, and I need a clear definition of things. And I came in touch with regeneration through the work of Bill Reed. Some of you might be familiar with him. And in very simple words, regeneration for him is bringing human activities back into balance with nature's laws and processes. So whatever we do needs to be anchored again in how nature functions. And a very essential part of this is also to recognize that we are an active player in this. We're not some sort of, we need to protect nature, put it in a box and let her do her thing. No, we actually have agency and need to contribute that nature can regenerate better and stronger. And to get to my little prop, I work with soil. Need to take it out, it's very, very little. This is, I have an association called TerraBiome. We're about 5 years old, working on soil, exploring soil, if you will, from many different angles. This is our first attempt to merge with the arts and design world. And what came out, it's a process of about 1.5 years, is a social innovation lab. This is the tip of the iceberg, the soil pyramid. And she's an invitation to bring soil back into our consciousness, to look at soil. Often, when soil is healthy, it's covered by plants. We don't see it. We don't ever think about it. This brings soil back into our view so that it invites us to go deeper to other layers of how do we treat soil? What is even soil? How does it come about? And what can we do to treat our soils better as we're currently degrading them? How can we turn it around to regenerate them?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because if you actually smell a healthy soil and smell a dead soil, you can literally smell it. I mean, in the sense of you smelled life. And Daniel, you said you've got what is a syntropic food forest?
It's life is a syntropic process. A lot of people, particularly the physics-trained people, will bump into the second law of thermodynamics very quickly in terms of the negative view that everything is just running out to a universe of heat death, where we just have a lukewarm mess where every particle is equidistant from every other particle. And life has the capacity in a locality like this planet to work against the flow of entropy and create syntropy. Life is a syntropic process. And a syntropic agroforestry system is trying to exactly start with the soil. The first year I mainly brought in lots of biomass, biochar, compost, straw, mulch, to work with the soil, to bring the right microbiome into the soil again, fungi, bacteria, and then you start working with the community of plants above soil. And don't get the mistake that regeneration is all about agriculture. It's not. But it's a beautiful metaphor to understand how we work with social or ecological systems as well. In one way, there's a beautiful conversation I had with one of my mentors, Fritjof Capra, beginning of this year, on YouTube. If you just Fritjof Capra, Daniel Wahl, you'll find it on YouTube. And in that conversation, Fritjof defined regeneration as regeneration is the essence of life's capacity to self-organize. And the soil does that, and we can do that. And yeah, I don't want to...
No, that's good. That's great. I like that especially. And so what are some of the things you would suggest that we need to be either doing or thinking about? I also like thinking of example, like amplifying the positive, finding exemplars of places or things to be looking to be inspired by, to not to imitate, but to incorporate. So for both of you, if there's one book, one article or something you say, everyone, here's a piece of homework I want to give everybody. What homework would you give us? Or where would you tell us we need to go or to do? What would you share? What would you ask of us to do? Krista?
Just one.
Okay, well, let's start with one. Let's see how we go.
That's a tough one. I think all of you have already taken a huge step by being here and dedicating your life towards that. So who am I to tell you what to do? In my personal experience, it very much starts from within us and our own personal life. We all have an incredible rich life journey. And it starts with digging deep and recognizing what is our gift, what is it that we can bring to the world. And it's different for every one of us. And then having the courage to embrace that. For me, it took me 7 years. I played 15 years of high competitive sports, women's rugby in Switzerland. You're very, very on the side. And then I had a big accident and I lost my identity. So who am I if I'm not an athlete? And it took me a really long time to dig deep and then embrace, actually, there's more pieces to me that I was never really allowing to come out. And taking that step took so much courage. But then the moment you do it, it's so liberating because you are you. And then you get to shine and do what you love. And I think this is where it starts. And this is where we are live, then contributing to other people's life, inspiring them to do the same. And then we can go into this entropic process. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Really, thank you very much. Daniel?
Homework.
Yeah, give us some homework.
I think if there's one thing that I would love you to take away is that right now the discourse about regeneration can be very quickly understood as the new kid on the block, the new adjective we now like to put in front of our consultancy office after circular, lean, smart,
resilience, sustainability. Yeah.
And that's not what regeneration is. And even the mindset of we are so insufficient now and we need to create this future utopia, which is called diverse regenerative cultures everywhere, is also dangerous. So my homework for you would be to ask 2 questions. One question is, what is my place? So what is the place where you can make a stance and say, this is the place that I am helping to regenerate? And how do we do that? We shift our perspective away from what is all missing, what are all the problems, to seeing the potential of people in that place. To understand that if the essence of life is regeneration, it is part of the evolutionary journey, then we as human beings would not be here if in our ancestry we had not known how to be regenerative expressions of place rather than owners of place. And if we just hold on for long enough to look at our communities and see regeneration everywhere, meaning the lady helping, I don't know, the local badgers, and the guy working with teenagers who are in danger of exclusion because they had a few run-ins with the police and drugs, or the guy who wants to protect endangered species. Yeah. Every attempt where life tries to, in the social, ecological, and economic dimensions of life, create conditions conducive to life and work with the potential of people in place is a regenerative act. And we really need to flip out of this well-intended mindset that we need to create these design sprints and hackathons to solve the global problems. That whole process of abstracting is part of what Bayo Akomolafe so beautifully says, maybe the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis. So we need to change our pattern.
That's it. I think that's actually a perfect place to pause for a moment and to have us all here think what you've heard and what questions you would like to ask Krista and Daniel. Because I have a whole page, and there's 100 of you in here, so it's not fair. It's 100 to 1. So I'd like for you to think about some questions you might ask Daniel and Krista. So we're going to take like a 4 or 5 minute silence. What did you hear? What would you like to ask? What does this mean for you? All right? So we're going to turn the mics off for a second. Okay. So I know this wasn't quite 5 minutes, it was like 3, but we're gonna. Does anybody have some thoughts or some questions they would like to pose? If you have questions, put your hands up really high. All right, that's enough. I think we can start with that. Here we go. So we're going to start up front with Mark and then Brandon, and we're going to go over here. So let's get to, we have a second mic. All the mics up here, so we've got one. So Mark, go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to come over here. Here we go. Okay.
So Mark. I get to pose a question to you, Chris, as well.
Oh no,
so,
please.
I won't. It's more in the way of a comment than a question, if that's legitimate. And it is that I hear and appreciate and agree with everything you've said. But it seems to be based on a kind of assumption that we have a change model in which the accumulation of individual actions are actually going to turn the ship around. And I think that the accumulation of individual actions of treating your hectare and a half well of plant, what I've done is plant flowering bushes in the land around my chalet and attract insects and birds and all that. I get that part of it, and I think it's very legitimate, and we need to bring that up to a far greater scale. It does nothing to address the underlying sources of nature destruction, which are built into the economic system, built into our financial system, built into the incentives that guide individuals and financial institutions, linked to their bonuses, to their promotion prospects, and to the individual, sometimes selfish interests of people. So that sort of, let's get more and more people doing the right thing, doing positive things, without addressing the negative things that are happening and need to stop, I think is probably one of our biggest challenges. And so the question would be totally supporting everything you've said and agreeing that we should all sort of follow that route. What can we do to deal with the sort of dark side?
So the systemic challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that the dark side has captured the overall narrative. We all remember, well, at least people my age remember when Margaret Thatcher described neoliberalism by saying there is no alternative. She had captured the narrative, and that narrative has dominated now for 30 years. Actually, there are many alternatives. But she somehow managed to convince people that this is it. It's the end of history. We've arrived at a plateau where neoliberal capitalism is going to dominate the world and solve all of our problems. We've suffered very badly from that, the planet first.
Great question. You want to go for it?
Thank you for that question. Really important. Yeah. Maybe I can pick up on one of these things up here. Transition to a planetary boundary compatible society. That's half of the coin. We will not create a world that can do this if we don't work with the socioeconomic foundations in every place that addresses the obscene inequality on this planet. And that means that we need to look at ourselves, look at the people next to you, and understand that we are probably all 1%ers, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, but we are on the top of that pyramid. If you haven't seen the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, look at it over the years. the process that Marx identified of the redistribution from the bottom of the pyramid to the top is still continuing rapidly. We live in a world with a fundamentally degenerative economic system, and if we don't address it, we will not be able to regenerate. But that also takes us to one very common, particularly in this kind of crowd, false dualism, which is the false dualism of, can we stop talking and get into action? We need to question the fundamental organizing ideas and narratives that are about who we are, what we're here for, and what are we to do. And this capture of narrative of the neoliberal world also is, while it's dominant in its degenerative impact on the planet, only a proportion of the world. There are still people living everywhere on this planet that are much more in contact with the regenerative patterns of their places. There's no coincidence that the world's biodiversity hotspots are indigenously managed lands. And so what I think we need to really focus on to address this structural violence is the narrative behind it. And that means living the questions more than jumping into solutions. Solutions are all prototypes for us to keep learning. There are no final solutions. Solutions are always, today's solutions are tomorrow's problems, just as yesterday's solutions are today's problems. So we need that humility as change makers and world savers and all that, to basically understand humbly that even what we are proposing will run into not being fitting for that place and its people anymore. And it requires this scale-linking dialogue. We need to work on both scales. I think the grounded action is what gives us the inner practice to be able to work outwardly in the world to address these issues.
Thank you, Daniel. Krista, would you like to add? Well, don't have to.
I can add a bit. Thank you so much. I think this really captures at the theoretical level. Of course, we work with soil very place-based because soil is super local. You can talk about soil up here, but you cannot act on it. And a lot of action actually happens at a place scale. Hence, everyone needs to find their place. Of course, this alone doesn't work. We need also the top-down, the system change. I believe what we're seeing today is system change takes so much time, and we're in an urgent situation, so we cannot wait on that system to change. And we're much faster and much more agile and much more easily adaptable when we work down here. But of course, we absolutely need to integrate. And I believe very strongly, and we're doing this through this DIY project, we need to invite these people who are taking the dark side decisions, who are continuing this system to be alive. Of course, they're privileged, they're gaining something out of it. We need to invite them to the table and share positive stories, example stories, because as long as it's abstract, they're the winners, they're not going to change. But if we can show alternatives that are functioning, that are working, that are also economically functioning, we have a chance.
So it's the storytelling and the amplifying the positive again. Daniel's going, oh, come on, no stories. I want to see stuff. No. Okay. We have another question up here, another comment or question, and then we're going to go on this side of the room. Who's on this side of the room? Okay, down here, Heidi. Down here on the right. Brennan, go ahead.
Really, your comments were quite perfect, because I was kind of looking at the opposite. Was that it seems like in both of your narratives, you talked about the individual change you have to happen within yourself, right? And so I'd really like you to speak more about what personal change you have to make within yourself, maybe on a spiritual level, physical level, intellectual level, so that we can begin to adopt the ideas, especially from the ground floor and not so high up.
Good question.
Right. I can try to. I know we don't have so much time, so firstly, I would like to refer Laura Sturm and Jill Hutchins wrote a brilliant book called Regenerative Leadership. So in there's a lot of techniques and approaches that you can look at. I think for me personally, in my experience, the single most important element was to let go of this idea, I need to understand everything. I need to control everything. My mind needs to have the facts, the data, and only then is it true. And to reconnect with, hey, but I have a body, I have somatic intelligence. My body has a gut feeling that tells me, ooh, this is a bit fishy, maybe don't go there. I have an emotional intelligence and I have an intuitive intelligence. And to reconnect with these elements. I think this is quite a simple step on paper. It takes a lot of mindset change, but if you can aim towards that, it's a good path to start with.
So the name of the book again was?
Regenerative Leadership.
Regenerative Leadership, okay. Daniel, do you want to have a crack at that? And then we're going to have a question over here. Heidi's going to have a question. Or a comment.
I think it's very dangerous, and it's part of that dark side capture of this conversation to put us into the situation of change your light bulbs, drive an electric car, do this, that, and the other, and then everything will be fine. The fundamental inner shift is to understand what I started with, that life is a planetary process of which we are temporary expressions, and that we are not captured in this skin-encapsulated ego. What we're looking at and who's doing the looking are much more fundamentally connected. It's a shift, if you want to put it in language, from a story of separation of an objective world out there that we just need to perfectly control and understand if we just do enough quantitative data and then we throw AI and data analysis at it, we will be able to wrestle prediction and control from a complex nested dynamic system that is fundamentally unpredictable and uncontrollable. When you understand that you're just an expression of that system, everything changes. And so it's that paradox that it needs an inner change to be able to work on those outer systemic structures. And the fundamental reshifting of the story is that these dark side superstructures that are currently still part of the taker culture, the exploitation culture, they're out, they're on the floor. The towel has been thrown, they're being counted out. No matter what they try to tell us, that this can run, like the whole future technology will ride over the hill and save us. We've left it for 50 years to react to our situation. Life itself is now going to show us what happens to a species that for 10,000 years with increasing numbers works against the flow of life. And that's going to be a very difficult 3-4 decades in which we will be humbled, maybe even broken, to then put ourselves back together again. And the only way to prepare for this fundamental transformation is to find your place and your people, because that's how we can weather that storm.
Thanks, Daniel. We have time for one more, Heidi, and then we're going to need to carry on.
Hello, hi. I'm Heidi, a leadership coach and holistic health advocate. I'm fascinated and shocked at the same time by how much part of nature we are. In the same way as the biodiversity of our soil is degrading, the biodiversity in our microbiome is reducing strongly. And the life expectancy, data shows, especially in the US, 2020 was a tipping point where people die earlier and not later. So we were always used, we're all getting older, but that has turned. So what we do to nature, we do to ourselves at the same time. And that's, I think, incredibly fascinating to witness and shocking at the same time. And based on that comment or observation, I wonder what the last statement you made when you said the way we react to a problem is part of the problem, how you could interlink that to that observation about our health of the planet and the health of humankind.
I guess that goes directly to me. The work that Tobias mentioned at the beginning that we kind of used as the basis for this spiral that was introduced is in 2006, between 2003 and 2006, I was working on my PhD, and I thought it was going to be called Design for Sustainability. And in that process, I realized that sustainability doesn't really tell us we are trying to sustain. And in the end, the title was Design for Human and Planetary Health. Health is an emergent property of that nested complexity in which we take form. The health of our microbiome, the health of our individual cells, our organs, our body, our families, our communities, our ecosystems, and the biosphere are fundamentally linked. And I think that as we're deepening into this conversation of how could we become regenerative again, we will focus on health. It's a beautiful entry point because everybody has an embodied experience of health. And we need to understand that when I wrote my PhD in 2006, people looked at me when I said planetary health. Now there's a Planetary Health Alliance with 270 universities and research institutes working on exactly the interface between ecosystems health and human population health. So things are shifting.
So I made a timing mistake. We actually have another 15 minutes. So, and I know there's a whole lot of other questions. Should we keep going, or do you want to? Yeah. Okay. So there were a whole bunch of questions in the back there. I see Brian said detail. So let's go. Let's let Stella go ahead and take these over to the right next to. Yeah. There we go. That's fine.
Thank you. Actually, I'm already overwhelmed by all the responses we get from also these nice questions. And my question is already a little bit answered, but maybe you can add up a little bit more. I'm relating to that accident you had, Christa, that took away your identity. And you said you had a period in your life of transition, of regeneration, where you had to find your new place. It hurt like it took you a long time. I can relate to that. You have jobs, relationships you stick on, and even if you know actually that it's not worth it anymore or you should change something, how can you become a person that changes hometown 28 times in 20 years? You also mentioned losing time. We don't have time anymore. So first, my question is maybe twofold. What is the learning of this time of regeneration, of transition? And how can we kind of shorten that time? Because we stick on all things, and we know actually it's not worth it. We stick on old identities. We know we have to change it. What are we afraid of? What do you think? Actually, it's on both. You know, the 28 times, I think it was you, Daniel, who said that. Really, yeah.
Okay.
Wow, what a question. Where to start? A lot of you in here, I'm sure, have gone through your own journeys of transformation. So again, this is my personal perspective, and I'm actually very curious to hear others as well. For me, it was really, I was training sports 2.5, 3 hours a day. Like this was a hobby, let's say. This didn't pay me, so I was also studying and working on the side, and it filled every single second I had. My social life was rugby, my training life was rugby. It made me feel my body. I felt at that moment like I know my body so well. Completely had to unlearn that. I really didn't. I knew how to extract from my body, how to push it to its limit. That's one aspect, but there's many more to our beautiful bodies that we all have. When this accident happened, I went down to no movement at all. So I also lost my outlet. Like, how do I process emotions? I go, move. Oh, now I cannot move. What do I do with it? And it forces you to just sit with it. It was not voluntary. It was very, very painful. But at the same time, sometimes I think if we don't choose to act on something, our bodies never lie. They never lie. If you feel a strange sensation in your body, I encourage you to listen to it. It tells you something. And many of us are no longer in touch with this because we're so much in our minds, in our rational thinking. So that brought me back to, okay, I need to slow down. And then, of course, beautiful connections from home. I was in New Zealand at the time, at the other end of the world, beautiful connections from home, support that I had not expected. People wrote to me letters, sent me presents. It was amazing. And it made me realize also, okay, maybe I'm a bit more than this. So one of the learnings, be open to receive. Some of us, especially when we're in this driven mindset, we always feel like we need to create things, we need to push things, we need to make it happen. Sometimes we cannot. Sometimes we do not have this energy or this drive, and we are in a moment of resting, whether it's voluntary or not, but be open to receive, because life constantly interacts. You're never alone. So that's one thing, allow to receive. And the other thing is, and here I kind of challenge your question, I apologize for this, but how can we accelerate this transformation? I would very strongly challenge whether we need to accelerate this transformation. Of course, that's the narrative, because we have this crazy planetary urgency and we have 7 years left until we completely turn around our lifestyle. And yet, what happened to me? And when I'm overwhelmed by complexity, I go back to the basics. The body is basic. Each of our bodies functions pretty similarly at a physiological level. If you push too fast, okay, my bone is healed, but my muscles aren't, and my tendons aren't, and my ligaments aren't. I will go on a 10-hour hike, have an amazing day. The next day, I'm back on square one. So if I try to accelerate, it doesn't work. I actually needed to be patient despite not wanting to, but really, really slow down. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges. Hang in there. Sometimes it feels very alone, and be open even in this vulnerable moment of transformation, not knowing who you will be, what's coming. Be open to receive. And what happened in my case is I actually went back to my roots. Before I did sports, my father's from a mountain village. That's my roots. I started spending lots of time at home, and I realized, hey, actually, geography was my first passion before sports, and I went back to that. This doesn't have to happen for everyone, but for me, this is what came because I was forced to allow the time. So please be patient with the transformation. Yeah.
Thanks, Christa.
Napoleon famously said it before the Battle of Waterloo to his servant, "Dress me slowly, I'm in a hurry." And I think that's a good advice for all of us. We're right now at this point where we need to slow down because we cannot afford to rush off and save the planet in the way that we think we can do that. And that brings me to a second piece of advice, which is C.G. Jung, who taught at ETH, reminded us that as human beings in that long journey from our regenerative ancestry to where we are now, we have 4 ways of knowing available to us. And our culture is stuck in just one of them, which is thinking, the analytical thinking mind. But sensing, feeling, and intuiting are the other 3. And that's what we need to learn again. When we come home to our body and to really listening to our body as an expression of life, we learn how to, thinking is the way that we quantitatively analyze the world with objects out there, we label, we structure. But sensing, feeling, and intuiting are all access points to the qualitative dimensions of life. And literally, we need to get out of the way of our thinking and become rooted in place and community again enough to understand that life itself can work through us. This overused thing that we're all change makers. Change is making us. It's the other way around. And it will make us really fast in the next few years. It will transform us. And last little piece of advice, which is something that I gathered from conversations with indigenous elders in different continents, you can almost everywhere find this advice that with any serious decision in your life or in your company or in your community, ask 3 questions. Does it serve myself? Does it serve the community? And does it serve life? And with any decision, you have to have at least 3 good answers on all 3 levels. To have answers only on one of the levels doesn't serve. If we try to serve the community and life and we don't serve ourselves, then what Tobias was referring to, we're running a sprint when really we're in for a marathon.
Fantastic for both of you. Thank you so much. I haven't heard that one before. Does it serve myself, my community, and does it serve life? Not my life, but life.
Yeah.
Right?
The community of life.
Yeah. I think that's really fantastic. I think Brian had a question. Stella, if you could give the mic to Brian, and then we are going to move to the. We're going to have to move to the.
Thank you. I found this really, really regenerative, and this is the reason why I keep coming back here.
Thanks,
This
Brian.
dialogue was amazing. I'm struggling between the old think global, act local back in the 1970s, and what I'm hearing is it's much more complicated than that, but I'm hearing you have to think and act both globally and locally. And I'm also hearing we need to get beyond the sort of dominant narrative and the paradigm. And yet, the part of me says, if we're going to make the goals, we need to scale this. And what you guys are doing is magnificent. It's zooming in and it's changing in local communities. Doesn't take a lot of financial resources, I think, to change the local community. But my question is, how can we apply the financial resources to change and the political resources to change the economic incentives which are destroying the planet? We're in a hole. We have to stop digging first. And the only way to stop digging really is at that macro level, which means electing the right politicians, which means impact investing that is scalable, which I heard, Krista, in your first remark. So how do we manage the urgency of the crisis to stop digging? And this gets back to, I think it was Mark, the first questions as well. But that's what I'm wrestling with here with this approach. We need to do both. We need to do impact investing, and we also need to be change at the local level.
Do you want to go first? Or?
Go, somebody.
I can give it a try. I'm sure you have many more models. Again, very, very great input. And yes, thank you very much. And one of the things I try to do constantly in my work is simplifying complexity, because it's so complex and we need to do so many things at so many levels, which is why I love soil. It's such a model. How does soil come about? At some point it's bare rock, there is no life. And then slowly but surely leachings come about and prepare the ground for slightly more, it's not even soil yet, moss comes about, and slowly you start having organic matter, and the system, starts very, very slowly until you have deep soil and amazing ecosystems and climax. Now you bring in this complexity back, and we're in the middle of an ecosystem that is collapsing, and we don't have the time for this ecological succession to allow it to happen. We absolutely, and I cannot stress this enough, we need the top-down decisions, and we need them yesterday, like really soon. At the same time, how do we do this? Positive psychology tells us it's really challenging after the age of 25. Being imposed something will not really make you act. You will, because you have to comply, but you will do it with a grudge, and the moment you can break out of it, you will no longer do it. So I'm a strong believer, and I know it's challenging because it takes more time to apply positive psychology, to show the opportunity. So there, what we desperately need, and this is not my expertise or Terrabiom's expertise, but maybe some of you, and I trust some of you are already working on that, we need to write the business cases, the economical cases. We need to show the value of nature. I know there's brilliant work on that around ecosystem services, Robert Constanza, many, many more models. And we need to have people decide on that. And we also, and it's not the countries, not only the countries, we need to get under, no, I don't want to use the word control. We need to get on board the big international corporations that don't have a place, that are not accountable to anywhere or anyone, that can move. If taxes are better in that country, I will just move my headquarters. We need to find a way to solve that. I do not have the solution, but please, any of you who are working on this, I think this is the most urgent thing we need to do from the top down.
And I think, thank you, Krista. I think there are some in the room who are working on ideas on this. As a matter of fact, there are two up in front here, and there's a few others. So who's actually working on this kind of a? Put your hands up. I know there's more. Put them up. Don't be shy. Put them up seriously, so we can. You can see there are those who are working on these right now. So we might want to that question, to come and try to talk with these individuals, because there are solutions on their way. Daniel, and then we're going to...
The question of how do we scale it up is, to my mind, part of that, part of the crisis is the way we respond to the crisis. We've talked a lot about complexity. One of the fundamental insights from complexity science is that complex dynamic systems, which in a quick way, any system with 3 interacting variables is a complex dynamic system, are fundamentally unpredictable and uncontrollable. They're intelligible. We can understand their patterns, the strange attractors they're running in and how they shift from one to another, but they're not controllable. And so if we keep trying to scale up that process of lots of problems in the world, let's collect the data, bring transdisciplinary, different scientific perspectives on the problem, then bring in the designers and engineers to do a hackathon to design solutions, then let them pitch to the angel investors or the impact investors and pick the best ideas and ask, how do we scale them out and bring this solution everywhere? And then we're surprised that these abstract solutions that came from abstract problems don't fit into place and culture. We need to have an approach that is exactly the other way around. Instead of scaling up, we need to scale out. Scale out the process of meeting complexity and managing or embracing complexity, not through this abstraction process, but through a place-based process of seeing the potential that happens when all these problems that are real show up, but they show up in a particular locality with particular people where there is no other, where everybody is part of the community. In my book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, I repeat ad nauseum that the process to create regenerative cultures is to live the questions together, from that wonderful Rainer Maria Rilke invitation to a young poet. You have to live the questions because the answers are written in books whose language you don't understand. And if you live the questions long enough, one fine day you will live into the answer. And so and I do speak to philanthropic and impact investors quite a bit, I keep reminding them that the way to reach scale is to enable people in every bioregion of the planet to look at the potential of their community and their place and ask the question, how can we reintegrate into life's regenerative pattern again and become regenerative expressions of place again? And that's not a technological problem. It's much deeper than that. Technology obviously will help, but we really need to create these processes by which we re-inhabit the planet. And we desperately need funding for that.
So, Daniel, Krista, thank you very, 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 very much for your commitment, your passion, and sharing your wisdom with us. Very sincerely, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Before we move to the next part of the program, I'd just like to say there were more questions, more hands that came up than we had time to ask. I'm sure many things were boiling in your heads. And here we have 2 individuals who I'm sure would love to carry on this dialogue with you. And I encourage you to find the moments during lunch or dinner or next to the Corona tonight at the fire pits to continue this conversation and get a little bit deeper. So with that, thank you both so very much. It was really fantastic. Yeah.
I want to hug too.